Faithless Hijabi provides a supportive community for young people who have left the faith, along with access to mental health services and resources. But they need your help to continue their important work. Please consider donating to Faithless Hijabi and help make a difference in the lives of these young people. Together, we can provide them with the support they need to heal and thrive.
All right. I'm gonna do my best to introduce our next two guests. They don't need introducing, to be completely honest. They are very well known. We have Jimmy Bangash. Jimmy is an ex-Muslim that is very dear to my heart. He is a psychotherapist that has been working with ex-Muslims and Muslims that come from the LGBTQ community, and he's been an activist. And I've known him for quite a while. Great guy. Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Nuriyah Khan is a great lady. I love her so much. She is a YouTuber and a Muslim activist. Remind me of your YouTube channel. I'm sorry, I forgot it.
Thanks, Ghada. It's called Holy Humanist on YouTube. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And today we're going to talk about the mental health issues essentially that go with us being ex-Muslims and everything. And one of the biggest questions I really wanted to ask to both of y'all, since we all had to go through it. Jimmy, I know you grew up in a traditional family of some sorts, and coming to terms with your sexuality, with your opinions, with your beliefs. What would you say helped you cope during that time? Not necessarily before coming to terms with it, but during that time.
So I think one of the things that helped me the most was finding the gay community, actually. The gay community in many aspects is pretty irreligious. So a lot of people who might have grown up as Catholic or as Christian or as Hindu, Jewish or Muslim, I think if you were to do a study and look at what the numbers say, you'd probably find a correlation between being LGBT and being irreligious, or people being LGBT who were born into religion and then apostatizing. I don't have any data on that for you, just based on all of the gay people and the gay circles I've been in. What you notice is that religion doesn't play such a big part. There are, however, at the same time, gay Christians, there are gay Muslims. That movement has grown since, in the last decade and such. But one of the things that happens when you leave Islam is that you lose community, right? You lose family, you lose your friends, you're often demonized, you're shunned. There's a whole load of emotional blackmail and emotional abuse that takes place. If you're able to avoid physical abuse, that's great. And even when you do avoid physical abuse, often there's the emotional abuse that comes afterwards. And trying to deal with all of that in isolation is overwhelming. It's too much maybe for our human psyche to be able to bear alone. So I was lucky, I guess, to live in a Western liberal democracy where I was able to find gay people who didn't really know much about Islam. The gay community then, possibly it wasn't as diverse as it is now. It was very sort of white as a community, but that represented safety. Sometimes I think, there's a whole sort of woke movement of white people are the devil, but actually, if you come from an ethnic minority, we have the highest rates of homophobia. And so white society represented a very safe place to be, comparatively, when you're a gay man. There's a really interesting dichotomy there that people don't acknowledge, because it's counter the woke narrative. But it was that sense of finding another community who were going through the same experience as me. So they were all gay, and maybe they were not dealing with religious persecution, but society was quite homophobic itself. So people were dealing with the same homophobic challenges that I was dealing with. And obviously back then, there was no ex-Muslim community, right? And so I wasn't able to find an ex-Muslim community as we can do now. But that was the key thing that helped me navigate it. I felt held by this other group of people.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, I remember, because I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I remember growing up there, and just to give a quick overview and not to completely get away from this, but in Saudi Arabia, it all really depends on your family and where you're from. So if your family is rich and liberal, you're good. You don't have to worry about anything. The only people when I was there that I was able to connect to were people that were from the LGBT community. And because they understood, just like you said, like it's a very difficult time when you're going through that and when you're going through just trying to understand who you are, trying to understand and accept who you are. And you hear all of these things that come from everywhere. You're essentially a sin, you're sinning, and it just it takes so much from you, especially if you don't believe in it.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that point, Ghada, if I can. It's been a while since I read it, but I remember reading Ayaan Hirsi Ali's Infidel. And there was one story that really struck me of her experiences that she shared about. It was the one where she started to enjoy something as simple as wine. Now that's a simple pleasure that most of us enjoy in just everyday life, but it's a religious taboo in Islam, and it really resonated with me because I remember being raised Lutheran myself, and there was some really strict ideas of how you're supposed to feel and behave especially when it comes to sexuality. And when you become a teenager, you all know the things that go with that. It's really difficult enough to navigate when you start having feelings for the same or opposite sex, but as you grow up, but it gets exponentially more difficult once there are religious restrictions in place that feed you needless guilt. I remember it was a real painful process for myself, and something I wanted to ask the both of you. Jimmy, I'm familiar with your story. Nuriyah, not quite with yours, but it was coming from that religious framework. Was there a lot you guys had to unlearn to accept yourself for who you are? Like, what helped with the process? Because I remember, I think in Ayaan's case, it's been a while since I read the book, disclaimer, but she gradually started enjoying it, and she had to kind of wean herself off the religious belief that she had been raised with. Was there a similar process with both of you?
Nuriyah, go for it. I want to monopolize the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Bruce, no, exactly. It was a lot of unlearning. It was unlearning things that, as you said, are based on just aspects of guilt that you might not necessarily adhere to, but Islam kind of imposes that guilt on you. Take like Christianity and I guess times it by 10, the guilt levels in Islam, for something as simple as wine that Ayaan Hirsi Ali might enjoy now, which she could never think of before. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a constant, I'd say, process of unlearning until you really become who you are. You're shedding everything that you were once taught, all of something as simple as, like me ordering a McDonald's breakfast and asking them not to hold the bacon. For me, that's unlearning what I've been taught. It's so simple. I know it's so minute, but that's just me going against everything I've ever known, is keeping that little piece of bacon in that sandwich. So yeah, I think it's a constant process, and we're still kind of going through it. But yeah, Jimmy, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think also, you're right, there are some really basic, simple things, but there are some really huge, fundamental human aspects, like just the idea of sex, Nuriyah, within Islam, and how if you're having sex outside of marriage, what that means about you as a human being, and what that means about you as a person, and how disgusting and dishonorable you are if you're doing that act. But then even after you die, how you'll be punished and tortured for eternity for doing that act. So what does that do to a person's relationship to sex? What does that do to a person's relationships to their own body in the act of sex? So some of these things are, and then how do we cope with that? How do we cope with this idea of disgust? Because in order for us to cope, we can't sit with the disgust, so we have to kind of disassociate from it in some way, or we have to repress our feelings around how we're relating to our body. So I think, religious trauma is not to be underestimated. The unlearning, and I love this idea that you said of shedding, almost like it's you're exfoliating from yourself this old skin that is no longer relevant or needed, and in that act of exfoliating, new, more beautiful, radiant skin is kind of what we begin to inhabit. But it is a process, and I just want to say how important this is in terms of the mental health program, because And people like Nuriyah who work around domestic violence, and people like myself, who work in psychotherapy, we have this term called working with live threats. So, you might have a whole load of people who work in psychotherapy and they work with clients, but they're not necessarily working with live threats. So the clients you're working with are not necessarily in imminent danger. But you might be working with that in the UK, or you might be working with that live threat with clients in America. But even when you're working with live threat in the West, you're working with that live threat within the context of Western adult safeguarding. You know that if there is a threat to that woman from her husband beating her up, the police can be called, right? You know that if there is a threat that that husband is going to rape the wife, there is the police that can be called, who can come and enact justice or help her get away. But when you're working with ex-Muslims in Muslim majority countries as a therapist or as an activist or a human rights advocate or a caseworker, you're working with live threat without this holding of institutions often supporting the safeguarding work that you're doing. So for example, if I'm working with an ex-Muslim woman in Saudi, and I understand that she's undergoing marital rape, well, there is no law against marital rape in Saudi. There's no law against marital rape in Egypt. There's no law against marital rape in Yemen. So some of these things that we take for granted as therapists or human rights activists or caseworkers in the West, they're not even available conceptually in these Muslim majority countries. And that's such an important reason why this work is even more important, is that these people don't even have some really basic rights, like being protected from rape in marriage. And offering a space for psychotherapy for them, really makes a difference.
One question I have for the both of you is, like, with the kind of treatment and services you're able to provide for people without those liberal frameworks, are you limited in, are you limited in what you're able to prescribe, especially with what advice and what help you can provide for them? Because although you might be speaking from them from outside the cage, the society they live in may severely restrict what options they have to recover, to what extent they're able. Like how does this confine your work?
Yeah, and so I think for me it's all about exploration with your client, right? Your client knows their life best, they know their levels of safety best, they know what accesses they have to institutional support, and so exploring that with them is what's really important. And yeah, there's definitely things that you can do with clients in the West who might be ex-Muslim that you cannot do with clients in Muslim majority countries. It's just not an option because, in all of the countries where apostasy is illegal, they're all Muslim majority countries. And where it is illegal, for a number of those countries, the penalty is death, and others, the penalty is imprisonment. Perhaps those kind of things you don't have to worry about in Western secular democracies. And so you have access to more. But that doesn't make the work any less meaningful, because working with somebody who is in Iran or in Saudi or in Pakistan, who is closeted about being an ex-Muslim and holding the space for them, like for 1 hour a week, 12 hours over the course of the week, can do so much to their ability to reintegrate their psyche into themselves. So if you think about when you are in the closet, whether it's about being gay or whether it's about being an ex-Muslim, there's a lot of disassociation taking place there. Half or a significant part of your life has to be divorced from the truth, right? So when you're working with somebody and you're able to hold a space with them and they can bring all of who they are into this 1 hour a week for 12 weeks, there's some process of reintegration there that happens that can do a lot to alleviate depression, anxiety, do a lot to enhance self-esteem, self-confidence, which is the damage that disassociation can do.
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo what Jimmy said as well, if that's okay. But for example, well, like in my line of work, I see I'm not as grateful to work with as many ex-Muslims. Few and far between come through to our service. But in general, for me, what I've seen is that religion is the overarching obstacle in people wanting to kind of take a situation further, or like whether it's something as basic as reporting rape to the police, as Jimmy was saying. So where you can focus on kind of the the rehabilitation part of it. We don't even get women who are willing to kind of come out with basic things that have happened to them, even when religion is used as the tool that's justified the abuse against them. So I've hardly come across situations where women have been in like, for example, an abusive relationship or an abusive marriage, and they've come out and recognized the role that Islam or religion had to play in their abuse. That's kind of just wiped under the rug and almost minimized in their greater experience. And I think for a lot of them, the opposite situation is true, where they rely on God so much, as then God is the only thing that they've got left to believe in, when the whole world has kind of let them down. And so I'm not saying they're by the book Muslims at all. I don't think they even know the reality of truth of Islam, but in a professional capacity, it's not my job at that moment to tell them that Islam is not true.
Yeah, I agree. So when I'm working with Muslim clients as well, if there are issues around domestic violence or whatever the input of Islam is, that's not my role as a professional to dissuade you from religion. Or even, Nuriyah, you know, when we talk about people coping, they have resources, and if religion is one of the resources you are using to cope, you know, perhaps as professionals our spaces to respect that this is how you make meaning and sense of the world. But obviously for ex-Muslims, that isn't the case. And I think, you know, we really have to be aware of the impact of or the concept of state as traumatic, you know, the religious state inducing trauma through religion on ex-Muslims.
I want to follow that line of thought there for a second, Jimmy. I'm curious if either of you two have ever tried to go back to faith, but try it out in a more progressive format. Like in my case, several years ago, this is way back before I discovered Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, that whole original crew of New Atheists. You know, I tried attending an incredibly progressive Christian church, and, you know, I actually ended up finding a community for myself there. And, you know, when I joined that environment, the funny thing is, if you walk inside there, you talk to the people, you'll find people of different religious denominations, you'll find non-believers, you'll find gay, transgender, all kinds of people. And I promise you, to this day, if you walk inside there, you talk to the individuals, you will not be able to tell the difference between them and a secular humanist. And, you know, the values that they espouse are largely what I would consider humanism. Now, I do have a problem with reformed interpretations, as I don't believe that that's intellectually honest. But the community mattered more to me. Did you ever try to attend like a more progressive mosque? Like, if so, like, did you ever have trouble for yourselves reconciling progressive values with literal scripture? And would you suggest that to people who are in dire straits, but perhaps they could find a more suitable environment for what remains of their religious beliefs?
I would like to kind of agree with you there, where, you know, for me, I think every individual human is different and everybody's on a different journey. And I think, you know, everybody's relationship with religion or whatever they were taught or born into is different, and the way it manifests in their life is different. I think if I hadn't gone through what I went through, I would have been a very, very quote unquote normal, like liberal Muslim. And happily, I could have gone through the rest of my life being like having the label Muslim on me. Obviously having views, as you said, that are more progressive and just not in tandem with Islam, but I would somehow justify that as my version of Islam and kind of be okay with it and go through my life. But as you said, the reason I started to speak and I decided to do activism in the first place was because I realized there's a point where you've got to be intellectually honest when it comes to an ideology, right? So for example, with Islam, as a woman, Jimmy can tell you as a gay man, there's certain things that are a deal breaker. It's such a deal breaker that you have to say, actually, this isn't just bad, this is terrible. The world needs to know that this says this. This means that you under these people would not be safe. I'm sure, like, obviously Jimmy can tell you as well, I came at it from an angle to protect women. I'm sure Jimmy speaks up just to show, like, obviously his experience is not congruent under Islam. There is no way that he would be allowed to live peacefully. So, yeah, I guess there is, like, as you said, there's a good comfort area where you can allow Muslims, as I said, in my professional capacity, if they're relying on God to, keep them hopeful or positive about the future, I'm no one to take that away from them. But to the rest of the world who are willing to be intellectually honest, I will tell them that the world has no place for people like myself or Jimmy under the banner of Islam.
Yeah. So did I find another religion? Like, I think for a long time, like maybe 7 years, my religion was gay. Like, it was just, that was my new religion. I was in the church of gay, I was in the mosque of gay, I was in the nightclub of gay, I was in the gay cafe, I was in the gay library.
It
Like,
means happiness, Jimmy.
yeah. I mean, but also, like, I wonder how balanced that was as an existence as well. But perhaps, saturating myself in that way was necessary because it was so demonized, and because having lost my whole community, like I lost my family, I lost any access to the Muslim community, I lost access to my home. Throwing myself into this other kind of world was really helpful, actually, until it wasn't. It became full of nightclubs, it became full of partying and all of that sort of stuff. And now, looking back, I can see how much of that was an effort to heal the religious trauma and the family trauma that had occurred, right? Like, you're just, through partying non-stop, you're trying to anesthetize the pain of being severed from the people who are supposed to protect you the most, from the people who you're expecting to love you the most. So that was probably my primary religion for a while, also after being Muslim. But then I started meditating, I think probably about 16, 17 years ago, I started meditating, which is not really community-based. It's quite a solitary activity. I know there are group meditations, but for me, that has been phenomenal. It's literally been phenomenal. It has contributed to a sense of balance in my life, and a sense of regulation. Like, if I feel dysregulated or destabilized, I can always kind of go back to meditation to bring me back home, really.
I wanted to add a little bit and also follow up on something you mentioned, Jimmy. So, like you, I also grew up, in Saudi Arabia, at a family that was extremely religious and fundamentalist. And when I came out, or when they found me out, I was also severed. Didn't have any family, didn't have anything else. And also during the time I was living with them, it was a complete double life. It was extremely draining. And so I wanted to go back a little bit to the double life. So a lot of us ex-Muslims, unfortunately, have extremely religious families. And because our families are very religious, if we were to deviate from what they believe is the right path, we are immediately demonized. And in the worst case scenarios, like what happened to us, severed and threatened. So during that time, I mean, I'm just talking about myself, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people have gone through this because I've spoken with a lot of ex-Muslims that still live with their families, and they are closeted, and it's extremely, like, it kills their soul, for lack of better words, whenever they're going through that. And I mentioned something you were talking about, Jimmy, is, finding your meaning. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, I mean, I didn't do it, and I don't know. I mean, you're having fun in the Church of Gay, so we both were not really, let's say, in tune with ourselves during the time where we had to either lie or just put it aside to cope. If you had to talk to people that are in our situation, a gay ex-Muslim, an ex-Muslim woman, and this is also for you, Nuriyah, how would you talk to them? What would you give them as your 2 cents?
For me, I think it goes back to my original answer, is this idea of community. Yeah, because one of the things that we know is when you're living this double life, like, certain things, through that act of having to divorce yourself because you're lying, you might put the hijab on and then you have to go to work, but you're not believing in this hijab. And for some people, when they get to work, they might take off the hijab, right? And then they put the hijab back on when they're going back home. Or the same thing, they might be going to school and they're wearing the hijab, they take it off when they get to school. So there's this constant state of lying or denial, and it becomes, authenticity becomes difficult to grasp. Yeah, like, who you are as an authentic person, becomes convoluted and it becomes murked. But what you can do is find a community of ex-Muslims now. And this just was not, Ghada, an option like 20 years ago. It was certainly wasn't an option. Like the advent of the internet and social media, and guys, I'm not the hugest advocate for social media. I think it does a hell of a lot of damage. But one of the things it does do is allow people to connect with each other in ways that leaves them not feeling isolated. And I think when you're splitting or when you're doing this double life dissociation, that can be a very isolating experience. But the moment that you find other people who are going through the same thing, perhaps we can self-actualize in that group of people. Perhaps we can acknowledge our growth. Perhaps we can acknowledge our own achievements with that group of people in a way that we cannot when we're isolated, living a lie.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with what Jimmy said there. I think community is the biggest, I guess, the gift you could receive once you've realized that you don't follow the groupthink of people that surround you. For me, personally speaking, as a doubting Muslim that realized I don't want anything to do with this anymore, it was the Twitter community. It was finding YouTube that I would honestly say, in a sense, saved my life. So I can only empathize with what Jimmy is saying, just to know that there's other people out there like you, first and foremost, that you're not crazy for questioning God, for questioning Allah and his deal with Satan, for questioning, Eve being born out of the rib of Adam, questioning little things that you're not allowed to, questioning Muhammad's marriages. I think the sense of community is just one of the most powerful things to allow you to bounce back into society. And again, as Bruce mentioned earlier, it really goes hand in hand with the process of unlearning and being open to kind of letting go of everything that you were once taught, from coming from a religion like Islam, which is so totalitarian in nature, where, like Jimmy said, everything from going to bed with somebody to, for example, the foot that you use to step into the bathroom is monitored. So leading a religion like that to just think freely and, as Jimmy said, like sleep with who you will, make your own choices, eat what you want.
Nuriyah, the hand that you wipe your bum with.
Yeah.
Even the hand that you wipe your bum with is prescribed to you, right? Like to that level of
which shoe should you put on first?
How many sips of water you should take from your cup and how you should
Jimmy,
drink it.
three now.
And I think your hand has to be placed underneath the bottom of it as well. It's insane
You
rules.
probably need to say a whole bunch of subhanallahs and mashallahs and alhamdulillahs when you're done as well.
That's completely insane. But that level of control, and I think that's the other thing about, not only are you isolated, maybe in terms of no connection from people because you're pretending to be something that you're not, and you don't know that and you're not connected with any other ex-Muslims. So when you make connection with ex-Muslims, you're not isolated because you've got some maybe friends or connections. But what is more important perhaps is you're not isolated in experience, right? Like what you're going through and the quirks of having to wipe your ass with this hand, other people understand. I mean, because unless you're Muslim, you don't really understand what that's about. But other people understand what that's about. Are you allowed to say ass on YouTube?
Yeah, I guess so.
We demonetize now.
You're good.
It's a religious context. Surely it's okay.
It's called
if you feel guilty about that, Jimmy.
Yeah. So I really think like that there's, that is the beauty of the internet. I think it was Mariam Marzi who said the internet is doing to Islam what the printing press did to Christianity, and that's probably one of the most beautiful quotes that I can think of. Yeah.
Friends, we're coming up on the end of our session, but I want to throw out one shotgun question that hopefully you, Jimmy, and Nuriyah will be able to answer. Dealing with your clients and as they begin their journey from whatever is distressing them and what you two had to go through, do you ever get angry about the kind of life that you could have enjoyed, or the kind of person you might have been if you hadn't have to unlearn so much at an advanced age when you started divorcing yourself from fundamentalist religious beliefs? has that been a pattern in your clients and yourselves? We're running out of time, so if you guys keep it to a shotgun answer, that'd be great.
I mean, I just want to say one quick thing which we didn't touch on, which is just safety,
Sure.
guys. So if
Please.
you are reaching out to ex-Muslims, if you are trying to form links with ex-Muslim communities, and you're living in Saudi, you're living in Pakistan, always prioritize your safety. If you need to do this behind anonymous Facebooks or anonymous Twitter accounts, it's absolutely fine. Like, you have to think about how safe you are in doing what you're doing. And then in answer to your question, Bruce, that might have been a different answer several years ago, but I think now, you know, where I am in my life, it's flipping amazing. I have like such an amazing life. I get to talk to amazing people like Nuriyah face to face over coffee. They hang out at my house. It's just beautiful, right? So I'm actually really grateful for the life that I have. And I think that's accessible to every ex-Muslim. I really do.
Yeah, I agree exactly. I'm where Jimmy's at as well. I think I would not change this for the world. I would not change the way I think, but I do look back at a younger myself and think, oh my days, if you didn't give over so much trust to authority, and you believed everything that you were told, including my clients who it's not my job to shake them out of religion, but they use it despite being abused by it. There's it's a very tough line to walk, but you kind of just give them enough agency to kind of think for themselves. And I think if we empowered Muslim minds or any religious, inclined minds the world over to just think for themselves, give them that opportunity, a lot of them would turn away from themselves and live the way me and Jimmy are today.
Well, we're out of time, so we have to move on to our next session. But I want to thank the two of you sincerely for what you do for people who are not able to help themselves. And it's been fantastic speaking to the both of you. I hope we get a chance to do this again in the future. And Jimmy, Nuriyah, it's been a sincere pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, guys. Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
That was a very good session.
Do I have to click something, or are you going to click me out?